3 Threxian warships, 800 raiders, 10,000 cattle, 1 old cowboy, 18 seconds. That's how long it took Reno Hatch to turn the most ambitious raid in Threxian history into the most expensive military mistake of the century. They had been planning the ambush for 6 months. They had studied the trade routes. They had bribed the colony surveyors. They had even calculated the cattle stress patterns. They forgot one variable. The old man had been waiting for them. Saddle up, partner. If this is your first ride with Orbit Cowboy, hit subscribe and ring the bell. The frontier just got interstellar. Now, let's begin. The first shot came down at sundown. It hit the dust 40 meters ahead of the lead steer and turned a patch of red Andromedan hardpan into glass. The shock wave rolled across the herd like a wave across a still pond. 10,000 cattle stopped breathing for half a second, and then, as one animal, they exhaled. Reno Hatch did not look up. He was riding point on a converted hover saddle, an old man in a long oilskin coat with a wide-brimmed hat pulled low over his eyes, a rifle in a scabbard across his back, and a battered tin cup of coffee in his right hand. He had felt the warship enter atmosphere 6 minutes earlier. He had felt the second one a minute after that. He had felt the third one drop in low from the eastern ridge while he was finishing his second cup. He had been waiting for them since the day he took the contract. He set the cup down carefully in the saddle holder. He turned in the saddle. He looked back along the herd. 10,000 head of genetically reinforced colony cattle stretched across 2 miles of dust track, escorted by 4 hover drones and 3 young hands who had no idea what was about to happen. He keyed the open channel on his collar mic. Boys, the 3 hands snapped to attention on their own saddles. You're going to ride forward, past the lead steer. Don't stop, don't turn, don't look back until you hit the canyon walls at the 8-mile marker. You understand me? There was a pause. Mr. Hatch, sir, that's a Threxian incursion. 3 ships. We can't, boys. Reno's voice did not rise. It did not need to. He had been driving cattle across the galactic frontier for 43 years, and there were exactly 4 men alive who had ever heard him raise his voice. None of them were on this drive. You ride forward. You do not stop. That is the only order I am going to give you tonight. 3 saddles peeled off from the herd and accelerated forward. Reno watched them go. He waited until they had cleared the lead steer. Then he turned his own saddle, slowly, deliberately, until he was facing the 3 Threxian warships, now hovering in low formation a kilometer off the herd's flank. He picked his coffee back up. He took a long sip, and he waited for them to make the next move. The Threxian War Academies taught 7 canonical raid maneuvers. The Rex maneuver, named for a 400-year-old commander who had built his reputation on cattle drives much like this one, was the 3rd. It was a simple maneuver. 3 ships in low triangular formation, drop nets from the lead vessel, stun pulse from the trailing 2. Sweep the herd into the cargo holds in 11 minutes flat. The Rex maneuver had a 94% success rate against human freight convoys. The remaining 6% was attributed to weather. It had never failed against a single defender. Commander Krath of the lead warship watched the cowboy turn his saddle on the bridge hollow display. He noted, with the trained dispassion of a Threxian raid commander, that the human was old, that the human had not drawn his rifle, that the human appeared, in fact, to be drinking coffee. Kraft had been planning this raid for 6 months. The intelligence had come from a colony surveyor on a dead-end mining station, a desperate man with a debt who had sold the trade route schedule, the herd's genetic value, and the convoy's defensive weakness for the price of a transport off-world. The schedule was perfect. The herd was worth 12 million credits in raw genetic stock. The convoy had no military escort. The lone defender was a 71-year-old retired drover named Reno Hatch, who, according to the surveyor, was soft, slow, and 3 years past his last fight. Kraft had been generous. He had bought the surveyor's family a passage to Vraxis. 7. The operational plan had been reviewed by 3 senior raid commanders. The Vrex maneuver, a maneuver Kraft himself had taught to 17 graduating classes at the War Academy, had been chosen for its statistical reliability and its low collateral cost. The herd was to be taken alive. The drover was to be taken alive. The young hands were to be released after debriefing at the colony border. The raid was, in every measurable respect, conservative. Kraft had not bothered to bring his second-in-command for this drop. He had not bothered to authorize the heavy escort wing. He had not, in fact, bothered to read the surveyor's full report. Only the executive summary, which had run to 4 paragraphs and had concluded with the assurance that Reno Hatch was operationally negligible. He had spent his career, all 328 successful boarding actions of it, never being wrong about a target's threat profile. He keyed the formation channel. Vrex maneuver, standard pattern, stun sweep, on my mark. The 3 warships descended. Reno Hatch took another sip of coffee. The Threxians' first error was that they descended in the textbook formation, exactly the formation Kraft had practiced for 2 decades, and exactly the formation any cowboy with a rangefinder and a basic understanding of sound propagation could predict to within 4 meters. Their second error was the stun pulse warm-up signature. The pulse weapons on a Threxian war-class vessel emitted a low-frequency hum during the pre-fire spool sequence, a hum that was inaudible to most humanoid species, including Threxians, but which fell exactly within the auditory panic range of bovine quadrupeds. Genetically reinforced colony cattle were, in this respect, nearly identical to their Earth ancestors. Their third error was their flank. The Threxian formation, by long custom, kept its ventral cargo bays open during the approach phase. The bays were lined with grav nets ready to receive the captured herd. The bays were also, in their open configuration, the single most vulnerable point on the warship's underside. The only point, in fact, where a sufficiently massive impact could collapse the gravimetric stabilizers and bring the entire vessel down. Reno Hatch knew all 3 of these things. He had been waiting for them since the day he took the contract. He set down his coffee. He drew his rifle from the scabbard across his back, an old kinetic action piece, single shot, with a bolt that hadn't been redesigned in 212 years. He raised it to his shoulder. He did not aim at the Threxian ships. He aimed at the lead steer. The shot was the loudest sound the herd had heard in the entire drive. 10,000 cattle, already keyed up by the stun pulse warm-up hum, already spooked by the warship descent shockwaves, already running on 6 days of frontier dust and the residual neurochemistry of genetically reinforced fly response. Broke. They did not break in the direction Kraft had calculated. They did not break forward, away from the threat. They broke sideways, directly toward the open ventral cargo bays of the 3 Threxian warships now hovering at low altitude on the herd's flank. 10,000 cattle, 2 miles of dust track, a combined biomass of approximately 15,000 metric tons, accelerating from a standing position to a full stampede gallop in less than 4 seconds. The leading edge of the stampede hit the lead warship's open cargo bay at a velocity of 41 kilometers per hour, with the full mass of the herd packed behind it like a piston. The Rex maneuver had a 94% success rate. It did not have a calculation for 15,000 metric tons of panicked colony cattle entering its cargo bays at full gallop. The lead warship's gravimetric stabilizers held for 1 full second. Then they did not. The sound, 3 colony witnesses would later report to the Galactic Investigative Council, did not arrive in waves. It arrived as a single solid wall of noise, the sound of 15,000 metric tons of biomass meeting an open cargo bay, compressed into one continuous bovine roar that rolled across the dust track and broke against the eastern ridge like surf against rock. The vessel lurched sideways, tilted 90 degrees, and slid into the dust track with a sound that those same 3 colony witnesses would later report could be heard from 40 kilometers away. The lead steer of the herd, a 6-year-old reinforced bull named Ranger, by one of the young hands 4 mornings earlier, was the first animal through the cargo bay door. Ranger emerged on the far side of the wreckage in the next 4 seconds, bewildered, dust-coated, and entirely unharmed, and continued his stampede course directly across the back of the second descending warship. The second warship, which had been positioned on the lead's port flank, took the cascading shockwave directly into its own open bay and went down on top of the first. Its starboard wing impacted the dust track at an angle of 17 degrees, snapped along its primary stress line, and rolled the vessel a further 40 meters before it came to rest in a crater of its own making. The cattle did not stop. They flowed around the wreckage like water around a stone. 10,000 head panicked into the only direction the herd instinct could offer them, swept past the downed warships and continued their stampede course toward the canyon walls 8 miles ahead, exactly where Reno Hatch had told the 3 young hands to wait. The third warship pulled altitude. Kraft, on the bridge of the third vessel, watched 2 of his ships go down in less than 9 seconds. He had time to register the implausibility of what he was seeing. He had time to begin keying an emergency withdrawal command. He had time, in fact, to do almost everything he needed to do, except for the one thing he should have done 6 months earlier, when the surveyor first showed him the schedule. He should have asked who Reno Hatch had really been before he became a drover. The third warship's altitude gain was canceled by a single kinetic round that punched through its starboard exhaust manifold at an angle no Threxian engineer had ever bothered to armor against, because no Threxian engineer had ever met a human with a 200-year-old rifle and 43 years of practice. The round did not detonate the manifold. It did something worse. It severed the gravimetric flow regulator at its weakest junction, a junction that, according to the Threxian shipbuilder's confidential design documents, had a failure tolerance of 0 and reduced the vessel's lift-to-mass ratio to a value that no Threxian war pilot had ever been trained to recover from. The third warship hit the ridge in a slow, almost dignified spin. 18 seconds. That was all it took. If this ride's keeping you company tonight, hit that bell. What comes next isn't on any star map. The dust did not settle for a long time. Reno Hatch sat his saddle and watched it. He had not moved from his position. He had not lowered the rifle. The single round he had fired into the third warship's exhaust manifold was the only round he had fired all evening. The herd by now had begun to slow. Cattle do not hold a stampede past the trigger event for more than a few minutes. The genetically reinforced colony stock was, if anything, calmer than its Earth ancestors. Within 4 minutes, the leading edge of the herd had stopped at the canyon walls 8 miles ahead, where the 3 young hands sat their saddles in shocked silence and watched the cattle settle around them. Reno keyed his collar mic. "Boys, you all right?" A pause. "Mr. Hatch, sir, what just happened?" "Cattle drive. That's not a cattle drive, sir. That's exactly what it was, son. Hold position." He turned his saddle. He looked at the 3 downed warships in the dust. He could see survivors, Threxian raiders climbing out of breached hulls, blinking in the orange dust light of the setting sun, looking around at the scattered remains of what had been, 6 minutes earlier, the most ambitious raid operation of Kraft's 20-year career. Reno reholstered his rifle. He picked his coffee back up. He rode his hover saddle slowly, deliberately, across the broken ground toward the lead warship's wreckage. Kraft was alive. He had been pulled from the third warship by his own surviving raiders, dragged to the dust at the foot of the ridge, and propped against a section of his own ship's hull. His left arm was broken. His translation collar was cracked but functioning. His personal sidearm had been lost somewhere in the descent. He looked up as the old human rode in. Reno stopped his saddle 10 meters off. He did not dismount. He did not draw the rifle. He looked down at the Threxian commander with the patient, slightly bored expression of a man who had been about this same business many times before. "Commander Kraft," Reno said. Kraft stiffened. His name had not been on any of the raid manifests. His name was not in any colony database accessible to a drover. "You know my name. Kraft of the Vrex line. 4th generation raid commander. 328 successful boarding actions before tonight. Promoted on your 18th birthday. Taught the Vrex maneuver at the War Academy on Threxis. 2 for 6 years before requesting field command." Kraft stared at him. "How? I read. You are a drover. I am a drover now," Reno said. "I wasn't always." He took a slow sip of coffee. He looked for a moment at the wrecked warships. He looked at the surviving raiders, who had stopped moving and were now watching the conversation with the still attention of beings who had just realized they were not in the situation they had thought they were in. "You bought a surveyor on Halverson's Reach," Reno said. 4 months ago. You paid him in passage off-world. You got my schedule, my route, my drive plan, and a personality profile that said I was soft, slow, and 3 years past my last fight. That is correct. That surveyor works for me." The silence that followed was the silence of a commander watching the bottom drop out of his entire understanding of the past 6 months. "He has worked for me for 11 years, Reno said. "Every drover on the Andromeda Run has a surveyor who works for him. We have learned over the centuries that you people will always try to buy the schedule. So we sell it to you at a price you can't refuse, with a route you can't resist, with 3 open ventral bays and a lead vessel exposed to a flank assault. Kraft closed his eyes. He did not open them for a long time. When he did, he said, "You were not always a drover. Tell me what you were." Reno looked down at him. He did not answer immediately. He set his coffee in the saddle holder. He adjusted the brim of his hat. He looked, for the first time that evening, slightly tired. "I was the man who wrote the counter-doctrine to the Vrex maneuver," Reno said. Kraft did not breathe. 41 years ago, on Threxis Border 3, I was 29 years old. I was a tactical officer in the Colonial Frontier Defense, working out of a desk on a relay station that nobody on your side of the border had ever heard of. I read your War Academy's published doctrine for 6 years. I memorized the Vrex maneuver. I studied your formation discipline. I learned the cargo bay vulnerability the same way your engineers had learned it, by running the gravimetric calculations until the answer fell out. And then I retired. And I became a drover, because I knew, Commander, that one day, somewhere on the Andromeda Run, a young raid commander was going to look at a schedule on his desk and decide that an old drover with no military escort was a soft target. And I wanted to be there when he did. Reno picked his coffee back up. "It took 41 years," he said. "But here we are. I am not going to kill you, Commander. Slowly. You are going to walk out of this dust on your own feet. You are going to take what is left of your raiders, and you are going to walk 40 kilometers to the colony at Drover's Cross. You are going to surrender yourselves to the colony marshal there. You are going to give a full deposition. And you are going to tell every Threxian raid commander you ever meet, for the rest of your life, what happened on this drive tonight. You are going to be the lesson, Commander. You are going to be the warning every young raider hears at the War Academy, not in a textbook, not in a classified file, but in a story told around a campfire by someone who saw what an old Hewland cowboy with 10,000 cattle did to 3 Threxian warships in 18 seconds. And in 40 years, when you are old and you are sitting in a chair on Threxis, 2 watching the sun set, you are going to remember the name Reno Hatch. And you are going to remember that you should have asked. Reno turned his saddle. He rode back to the herd. The 3 young hands had brought the cattle back into formation by the time he reached them. The leading edge of the Stampede had not, against all expectation, lost a single head. Genetically reinforced colony cattle were tougher than the Threxian War Academy's manual suggested. The drive resumed at first light. By the time the colony marshal at Drover's Cross received Kraft and his 86 surviving raiders 3 days later, the news had already gone ahead of them. A drover on the Andromeda Run had taken down 3 Threxian warships with a single rifle shot and a herd of cattle. The story was already being told in saloons across 4 colony worlds. By the end of the week, it would be told in 12. By the end of the month, it would have crossed the border into Threxian space, and the War Academy on Threxis, 2 would, for the first time in 400 years, quietly remove the Vrex maneuver from the standard raid curriculum. Reno Hatch finished his drive. He delivered 10,000 head of genetically reinforced colony cattle to the receiving station at Andromeda Prime, the largest single delivery in the history of the route, and he collected his contract payment in full on the 14th day. He did not give interviews. He did not file a deposition with the Galactic Investigative Council. He did not. When asked by the colony marshal at Drover's Cross what had really happened out there in the dust, give any answer beyond a slow shake of his head and the words, "Cattle drive." The young hands who had ridden the drive with him would tell the story for the rest of their lives. They would tell it correctly, in every detail, and no one who heard them would ever quite believe it. The surviving Threxian raiders would tell it for the rest of their lives, too. They would tell it more carefully, with the precision of beings who had been there and could not afford to misremember a single moment of it. Kraft kept his promise. 41 years later, on a quiet afternoon on Threxis, an old Threxian raid commander sat on his porch and watched the suns set. He told the story one last time to a young grandson who had just been accepted into the War Academy. "Listen to me, child. There is one thing they will not teach you at the Academy. They will not teach you because they cannot bring themselves to write it down. But you must know it before you ever take a ship out into human space. You must always ask who they used to be, before they became drovers, before they became farmers, before they became old. Because somewhere out there right now, on a dust track on a colony world you have never heard of, there is a 71-year-old human drinking coffee and watching the sky, and he is waiting for someone like you to make the worst mistake of your life." The old commander closed his eyes. The sun set. Somewhere, on a quiet ranch on a colony world, the galactic surveyors had filed under unremarkable. An old man named Reno Hatch lit his oil lamp at dusk, sat down on his porch, and watched the night come down soft. He took a slow sip of coffee, and he waited for the next contract. That was the Stampede heard across the galaxy. Reno Hatch, 10,000 cattle, 3 warships, and 18 seconds that rewrote a War Academy curriculum. If this ride hit the spot, saddle up, subscribe, ring the bell. Ride with us every week. And before you go, partner, drop a comment below. If you were Commander Kraft, would you have walked the 40 kilometers to Dravers Cross? Or would you have tried to fight the old man one last time? Until next time, keep your guns clean and your stars closer.